Growing old was never something I feared. Wrinkles and gray hair, the slowing steps, even the occasional memory lapse. These things I welcomed as a natural part of life. What I hadn't prepared for was the way people change around you when they start seeing you less as a parent or grandparent, and more as a potential inheritance. For years, I had been the pillar of my family, the one who made sacrifices to ensure everyone had a roof over their head, meals on their plates, and opportunities to chase dreams that weren't always affordable. I never complained, because I believed that love would always circle back. But now, as I sat at my dining table with the hum of silence pressing against me, I began to notice the whispers, soft, sly suggestions from my children and their spouses that I might be better off downsizing. Downsizing. That polite word wrapped in false concern. What they meant was that I didn't need this big house anymore, and wouldn't it make sense if the house, the very one their childhood memories were built inside of, were passed down now rather than later? I laughed it off at first, brushing it away as clumsy concern. But the requests grew bolder. "Dad, you don't want to get confused with paperwork later, right?" My eldest nudged one afternoon, his smile stretched too tight. "It'd be easier if the house was already in our name." My daughter chimed in with false sweetness. "We're just looking out for you, Daddy. What if one day you forget things? Better to handle it now." Each word was sugar-coated, but beneath it, I tasted poison. I still remembered standing by their hospital cribs, promising them a life of safety, vowing that I would never let the world be cruel to them. And yet, here they were, not protecting me, but circling me like vultures around an inheritance that I wasn't even gone to give. The more they pressed, the more I realized the truth. They weren't worried about me at all. They were worried about themselves. My health, my mind, my fading years. They were nothing but obstacles standing in the way of what they thought was theirs already. And what unsettled me most was how natural they were about it, as if it were only a matter of time before I signed everything away. It started innocently enough, with them dropping hints about retirement communities. "You'd have friends your own age there," my daughter-in-law said brightly, her voice dripping with rehearsed cheer. "And we'd take care of the house, don't worry." My son even printed brochures, sliding them across the table like I was choosing a vacation package. They wanted me to feel like it was my decision, like I was gifting them a favor rather than being robbed of my dignity. But I wasn't blind. Every time their eyes darted around my home, they weren't admiring the paintings on the wall or the garden outside. They were calculating. They were measuring square footage, imagining their children running through halls I had worked my entire life to secure. My heart ached, not just from betrayal, but from the bitter realization that somewhere along the way, my children had turned me into a stepping stone for their comfort. They weren't asking for my blessing. They were demanding my surrender. And they thought that because I was old, because my hands shook slightly and sometimes I misplaced my glasses, I would give in quietly. They thought wrong. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I made a silent vow. They might think I was weak, forgetful, and ready to hand over everything, but I was far from finished. If they wanted my house so badly, they would have to learn the hard way that nothing in this world comes without consequence. The pressure didn't stop. It grew heavier by the day. My children became experts at weaving their greed into everyday conversation, their voices laced with fake compassion. Each visit, no matter how brief, eventually circled back to the same subject, the house. At first, they masked it under the guise of concern for my future well-being. But soon, the mask slipped, and the truth came out sharper, colder. "Dad, let's be realistic. my eldest son said one Sunday afternoon, his arms crossed as if preparing for battle. You're not getting any younger. The sooner the paperwork is done, the easier it'll be for everyone. You don't want us fighting later, do you? His words hit me harder than he knew. Fighting later? Was that what my children saw when they looked at me? Not their father, but a ticking time bomb of inheritance disputes? My youngest daughter added quickly, "We'd never fight, Daddy. But, you know, it would be smoother if things were settled now. Just for peace of mind." Peace of mind. For them, perhaps. For me, it felt like shackles tightening around my wrists. I wanted to believe they didn't mean harm, that maybe this was their clumsy way of trying to help. But every gesture, every sentence, carried an undertone of urgency. They weren't thinking about me. They were thinking about what I could give them before I was gone. It became clearer each day. My house, my savings, my will. They were more interested in those than in my company, my stories, or even my health. The final straw came one evening when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I had gone to bed early, or at least that's what they thought. But as I walked down the hallway for a glass of water, I caught my son whispering to his sister in the kitchen. "If we wait too long, Dad might forget," he muttered. "And then it'll get complicated with lawyers and all that. We need to convince him now, before. The word lingered like poison. Before I forgot who they were. Before I became too frail to protest. Before I turned into nothing more than a signature on a will." My daughter's voice, softer but equally sharp, answered, "Don't worry. I'll talk to him tomorrow. He trusts me more. We'll get it sorted. Just act caring. He'll fall for it." I froze in the shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. For a long moment, I just stood there, clutching the wall for support, fighting back tears that blurred my vision. My children, the very people I had poured my soul into raising, weren't just pushing, they were plotting. They saw me as fragile, gullible, someone who could be manipulated with the right tone of voice. I went back to my room that night, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying their words again and again. Every sentence cut deeper than the last. Somewhere along the years, the bond between parent and child had frayed into something ugly, something transactional. They wanted me out of the way. Not dead, but out of the way, so they could slip into the comfort of the life I had built. But here's the thing they didn't know about me. I may have been old, but I wasn't powerless. I may have slowed down, but I wasn't finished. And while they were plotting to take everything from me, I was quietly plotting, too. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If they thought they could pressure me into handing over my house, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my usual cup of tea, though I could barely taste it. My children came bustling in, each wearing the same masks of forced affection, their words honeyed, their smiles stretched too wide. "Good morning, Dad," my daughter chimed, planting a kiss on my forehead. "How did you sleep?" I wanted to answer honestly, "Not at all, because I overheard you plotting against me like vultures circling a dying man." But instead, I just nodded, watching them with a quiet intensity that unsettled them more than any accusation could. They weren't used to silence from me. They were used to my warmth, my eagerness to please, my tendency to say yes just to keep the peace. But something inside me had shifted overnight. I wasn't just their father anymore. I was a man who had decided to take back control of his life, no matter how old or fragile they thought I was. After breakfast, I excused myself and made a phone call, one that would set my plan in motion. My old friend, Richard, was a lawyer who had handled my affairs for decades. He answered on the second ring. "John, it's been too long," he greeted warmly. "Yes," I said quietly, making sure no one else could hear me. "And I'm afraid it's about to get complicated. I need to make some changes to my will." There was a pause on the line before Richard asked gently, "Is this about your kids?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You always were quick to read between the lines." "I'll prepare the papers," he said simply. "Come by tomorrow. And John? Don't feel guilty. Sometimes, family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty." Those words stuck with me. Loyalty. That was what had been missing all along. My children wanted convenience, wealth, and security. But loyalty? They hadn't given me that in years. Later that day, when my daughter sat me down with that saccharine smile and said, "Dad, I really think you should consider signing the deed to the house now. It'll just make things easier," I felt a surge of defiance rise in my chest. "I'll think about it," I said coolly. But inside, I had already decided. Not only would I refuse their pressure, but I would make sure they learned the value of loyalty the hard way. That night, as I packed a small bag for my meeting with Richard, I stared around the house that had been my sanctuary for decades. Every wall, every picture, every scratch on the floor carried a story. This was the house where I had raised them, where I had sacrificed, where I had loved them unconditionally. And now, they wanted to strip it from me as if it were nothing more than a piece of real estate. The betrayal burned, but beneath the fire was something else: resolve. I wouldn't hand them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. If they thought I was going to make it easy for them, they were mistaken. I caught my reflection in the mirror before bed. Yes, I was older. Yes, I was weaker than I once had been. But there was steel in my eyes that hadn't been there for a long time. My children had underestimated me, and I was going to use that to my advantage. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. They believed they were pushing me closer to surrender, but in truth, they had pushed me toward a decision that would leave them stunned. My will would not only be rewritten, it would be a weapon. And the ones who thought they could take everything from me were about to learn that sometimes, the old man they dismissed still had the sharpest mind of all. The following morning, I dressed more carefully than I had in years. My children thought I had no business outside these walls unless accompanied, but I wasn't about to announce my plan. I slipped on my old coat, tucked my papers under my arm, and told them I was going for a short walk to clear my head. They hardly looked up from their phones. The indifference stung, but it also fueled me. It made what I was about to do all the more satisfying. Richard's office was downtown, a cozy place with dark wood shelves stacked high with law books, and the faint smell of leather and ink that brought me a strange comfort. When I walked in, he rose from behind his desk with a warm smile and grasped my hand firmly. "John, you look like a man on a mission," he said. "I am," I replied with more confidence than I felt. "I need to protect what I've built, protect myself from my own children." He motioned for me to sit. "Tell me everything." I poured out the story, every cruel word I had overheard, every dismissive glance, every time they treated me like a burden rather than a father. My voice trembled at first, but then it steadied. By the time I finished, there was no hesitation left in me. "They want my house before I'm even gone," I said bitterly. They talk about me like I'm a number, an obstacle to their comfort. But I won't make it that easy for them. I want to rewrite my will. And I don't want them to have control over this house. Richard leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. Then we'll make sure they don't. You're of sound mind, John. Nobody can contest this if we do it properly. Who do you want to inherit instead? That was the question. For years, my mind had always defaulted to my children. That's what parents do, isn't it? But now, the answer came more naturally than I expected. I want it to go to people who have shown me kindness when my own blood hasn't. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, she's been bringing me meals without me asking. My old friend from church who still checks on me. Even the community center, where I've spent so many afternoons reading to kids. They deserve it more than my children do. Richard's eyes softened. Then we'll draft it that way. Every dollar, every brick of this house, will go exactly where you choose. Not one penny will line the pockets of those who abandoned you. Relief washed over me, so profound I almost sank back into my chair. For the first time in months, I felt like I was reclaiming my dignity. After signing the initial drafts, I left Richard's office with a spring in my step I hadn't felt in years. I walked slowly through the town, noticing the things I'd once taken for granted. The laughter of children chasing each other near the park, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery, the sun casting long golden beams across the pavement. Life felt vivid again, as though deciding to fight back had somehow reignited a flame inside me. When I returned home, my daughter asked absently, "Where have you been all day?" "Oh, just tying up some loose ends," I said with a small smile, watching her expression closely. She didn't even notice the weight behind my words. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I thought about the future. They still believed they had me cornered, that they would soon inherit everything I had. They thought their manipulation was working. But what they didn't know was that every fake smile, every calculated word, every attempt to guilt me was only pushing me further away from them. Soon enough, the truth would come out. And when it did, they would finally understand that loyalty and love couldn't be bought, stolen, or demanded. It had to be earned. The days after my visit to Richard's office unfolded almost too perfectly, as if fate were setting the stage for the drama to come. My children carried on with their charade, speaking to me with syrupy voices, offering hollow smiles, and dropping the occasional reminder of how much work it is to look after me. I played my part as the doddering father, nodding politely, never challenging their tone, letting them think they were in control. But inside, I was calm and steady, knowing I had already taken the first real step in turning the tide. One evening, my eldest son, Daniel, pulled me aside while his siblings busied themselves in the kitchen. He had that same smug grin he'd worn since he was a boy, back when he thought being the eldest gave him special authority over everyone else. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice as if we were conspirators, "we've been thinking it's time you gave us power of attorney. You know, just in case something happens. It'll make things easier. For you. Easier for me?" The words nearly made me laugh. What he meant was easier for them to siphon off my life's work without consequence. I looked him dead in the eye, careful to keep my expression neutral. "I'll think about it," I said. He seemed satisfied, but inside, I felt a quiet fire burning. They were getting bolder, less cautious with their greed. The very next day, my daughter, Clara, arrived with a stack of glossy brochures for retirement homes. She spread them across the dining table like she was unveiling a gift. "Dad, look at these. They've got activities, gardens, medical staff. It'll be so much fun. You won't have to worry about cleaning or cooking anymore." Her smile was wide, but her eyes betrayed her impatience. She wasn't thinking of my comfort. She was picturing my house, free of me, ready for her and her brothers to divide. I leaned forward, picking up one of the brochures, studying it as if I were actually considering her proposal. "They do look nice," I murmured. Clara's face lit up with false enthusiasm. "Exactly, Dad. You'll love it there. And we'll visit all the time." But I knew better. If they could hardly spend 10 minutes in the room with me now, what chance was there they'd drive across town to visit me in a facility? None. That night, I lay awake in bed, the sound of the old clock ticking in the hallway keeping me company. I thought about all the years I'd worked, the nights I'd stayed up late fixing the roof or paying bills, the sacrifices I'd made to give them a good life. And now, after everything, this was their gratitude, treating me like an obstacle to be pushed aside. My anger was sharp, but beneath it was something deeper, a clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for the dignity of every sacrifice I'd ever made. The next morning, I returned to Richard. I explained their attempts to rush me into a retirement home, their push for power of attorney, their casual cruelty when they thought I wasn't listening. Richard listened intently, his pen scratching across the paper as he made notes. "We'll reinforce your will," he said firmly. "We'll make it airtight. They won't be able to touch a thing." For the first time in weeks, I felt secure. I walked out of his office with my shoulders straighter, my steps firmer. I wasn't a victim. I was a man with a plan. Back at home, Daniel asked me later that evening, "So, Dad, have you thought about the power of attorney?" I smiled faintly, sipping my tea before answering. "Oh, I've been thinking about a lot of things." He didn't realize it yet, but the game had already shifted. For weeks, the house had become a battlefield of whispers, arguments, and sly looks. My so-called family hovered like vultures, waiting for me to stumble, to forget one detail too many. They thought age had dulled me. They thought the years had eaten away at my mind. Perhaps in their eyes, I was little more than a fragile old man clutching the keys to a treasure they already considered theirs. But they underestimated two things: my memory and this house. One rainy morning, as thunder rolled across the sky, I took my cane and climbed the stairs no one else dared touch. The third floor had been locked for decades. Even my children didn't know what it held. They thought it was just an attic, filled with dust and useless boxes. But they were wrong. I still remembered what my father had told me. "This house will protect the one who protects it." With shaky hands, I unlocked the heavy oak door. A gust of stale air greeted me, carrying the scent of time itself. Inside, the forgotten room awaited. It wasn't just storage. The walls were lined with shelves of old ledgers, letters, and photographs. Proof of every deal, every land purchase, every will that had been signed across generations. In the far corner, a trunk sat beneath a faded sheet. I dragged it into the light. My father's handwriting still marked the lid, "For when they forget you." I opened it, and inside were documents no one expected to exist. Hidden contracts, an updated will, and even deeds showing that parts of the property had already been transferred into my name years before my children were even born. They had spent months circling me like wolves, hoping for a piece of land that wasn't even theirs to claim. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel weak. Later that evening, when the family gathered in the living room, their eyes watched every move I made. I could almost hear their thoughts. He's slipping. He'll forget our names. He'll sign whatever paper we put in front of him. I leaned back in my chair, pulling out a yellowed envelope. You've all been so eager to talk about my will, I said, my voice calm but sharp. But did you ever think maybe I remembered more than you believed? Their faces froze. I spread the documents across the table. Deeds. Signatures. Proof. The forgotten room had spoken, and suddenly their confidence cracked like thin ice. My eldest son tried to argue, his voice rising with panic, but the evidence silenced him. My daughter reached for the papers, but I stopped her with a single word. Enough. The room fell quiet. They finally understood. This house was not just walls and land. It carried memory, legacy, and secrets too deep for greedy hands to steal. 4 years, they thought I was fading, a man who would soon forget even his own name. But in that moment, it was they who looked small, confused, and powerless. As I gathered the documents back into the envelope, I couldn't help but smile. I had remembered everything that mattered. And I wasn't done yet. The forgotten room had more secrets, ones they weren't ready for. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's letting them choke on their own impatience, while you hold the truth close to your chest. And tomorrow, I would open the trunk again. The game had only just begun. The morning after my revelation, the house felt heavier than ever. The silence of my children was not peace. It was planning. I knew them too well. Greed doesn't die in a single night. It grows quieter, sharper, waiting for the next strike. And strike they did. By noon, my eldest son arrived with a lawyer I had never seen before. He wore a polished suit, his smile practiced, his briefcase heavy with papers. My son announced proudly, "Father, we've taken the liberty of preparing a simpler will for you. You don't have to worry about all those old, confusing documents anymore." His words dripped with false kindness. The lawyer opened his case and slid a stack of papers toward me. My daughter leaned close, her voice honeyed. "Just sign here, Papa. It's for your peace of mind." I picked up the first page. The words blurred slightly, the curse of old eyes, but not enough to hide the truth. The document was nothing more than a trick, transferring the house and land to their names while leaving me a measly allowance, as if I were some burden to be managed. I let the paper rest on my lap. For a long moment, I said nothing. Their faces shifted between impatience and false concern. They mistook my silence for confusion. Inside, I almost laughed. Did they really believe I'd forget overnight? Did they think age was weakness? "I see," I finally said, tapping the paper. "And what do I get in this arrangement?" "You get peace, Father," my son said smoothly. "No stress, no responsibilities. We'll take care of everything." My daughter chimed in quickly. "And you'll always live here, of course. Nothing changes." But their eyes betrayed them. They wanted the house now. Not when I was gone, not when time had its way, but now. Their greed had grown impatient. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to think, while in reality I was listening to the faint creaks of the ceiling above us. The forgotten room. It was almost as if the house itself reminded me, don't let them win. I set the papers on the table. "Before I sign anything," I said slowly, "I want you all to come with me." Confused, they followed me up the stairs. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, their whispers bouncing against the walls. When I opened the door to the forgotten room, their eyes widened. "What is this?" my younger son asked. "This," I said, pointing to the shelves and boxes, "is where the truth lives." I opened the trunk once more and pulled out the original documents. The real will, signed and sealed years ago, along with letters from my father and grandfather. Evidence of ownership, guardianship, and trust. The lawyer's confident smile faltered. "You brought me here to see old papers?" my eldest sneered. "No," I said firmly. "I brought you here to remind you that I am not the fool you believe. You thought you could trick me with a fake will? You forget. This house remembers everything." I laid the documents side by side, the fake and the real. The contrast was undeniable. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, already sensing the danger of being caught in a scheme. For the first time, my children looked nervous, truly nervous. Their greed had been exposed, and they knew it. "Leave," I said, my voice low but steady. "Take your false papers and your false promises. When the time is right, you will get what you deserve. But not now. Not by trickery." The room grew colder, as if the house itself approved. As they retreated in silence, I placed the trunk back into its corner. I had defended my home once again. But deep down, I knew this was not the end. They would come back. And next time, their tricks might be far more dangerous. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. My children stopped calling, stopped visiting, as if licking their wounds after their failed attempt. But I knew them too well. Silence was not surrender. It was plotting. I kept myself busy around the house, polishing the old wooden banisters, airing out the rooms, walking through the garden my late wife once adored. Yet in every quiet moment, I could feel the tension lingering in the walls, as though the house itself braced for another storm. And then, one night, the storm arrived. It was nearly midnight when I heard the gravel crunch outside. Headlights cut through the curtains, sharp and invasive. I peeked from the window and saw them, my 2 sons and my daughter, climbing out of their cars with determination. They weren't alone this time. A man followed them, tall and broad, the kind of man who wasn't hired for polite conversation. My chest tightened, but fear didn't rise. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I had expected this. They banged on the door, calling my name with voices too sweet to be sincere. I opened it slowly, letting the heavy wood creak. "Father," my eldest said, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." Behind him, the tall man crossed his arms, a shadow of intimidation. I stepped aside. "Then talk." They marched in, filling the living room with their false bravado. My daughter wasted no time. "This is becoming ridiculous. You're old, confused, and you don't know what's best for yourself. We're here to take responsibility before things get worse." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they were rehearsed. This was no spur-of-the-moment confrontation. This was a plan. My younger son dropped a set of documents on the table. Different from before, thicker, stamped, already notarized. "We've filed the papers. All we need is your signature, and it'll be official. This way, there won't be any fights later. It's for the best." The tall man stepped closer, silent but imposing. I looked at their faces, desperate, greedy, restless. My children, the ones I raised, now standing in my living room as trespassers in their own home. The irony was painful. But I had prepared for this. Calmly, I reached behind my chair and pulled out a small black recorder. I clicked it on. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. "Do you hear that?" I asked softly. They froze. "This recorder has captured every word you've said tonight. The threats. The lies. The schemes. If you take one more step, this recording will go to the police, along with the evidence I've stored in the attic." My eldest son's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't dare." I leaned forward. "Try me." The room went silent. Even the tall man shifted uncomfortably, as though realizing he'd been dragged into something darker than he expected. My children exchanged frantic glances, their plan unraveling before their eyes. Finally, my daughter snapped. "This isn't over, Father. You can't keep us out forever." I smiled faintly, though my heart ached. "Perhaps not. But I can keep you honest. And I will protect this house until my last breath." They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The gravel crunched once more as their cars disappeared into the night. Alone again, I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, the recorder still blinking in my hand. The house around me seemed to sigh, as though relieved. But I knew this wasn't the end. The battle for my home, and for my dignity, was far from over. The morning after their midnight visit, the house felt strangely still, as though it held its breath. The recorder sat on the table, a small but powerful weapon, proof that I was not as powerless as my children believed. Yet I knew them well enough to understand one thing. People driven by greed rarely give up after one failed attempt. Sure enough, 3 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't handwritten, nor filled with familiar scrawls of affection. It was from a law firm. The words inside were cold and sharp, demanding a medical evaluation of my mental state. My children had taken the next step, trying to have me declared incompetent. If the court ruled in their favor, the house and everything else I owned would fall into their hands. For a brief moment, I sat in my chair and let the weight of it sink in. The betrayal cut deeper than before. It wasn't just their words anymore, but an official declaration that I was no longer capable of making decisions for myself. My children, the ones I had fed, clothed, and guided, were now using the law to strip me of my dignity. But I was not broken. Instead of despair, a quiet fire rose inside me. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. My old friend and lawyer, Thomas Hale. We had grown up together, and though time and distance had stretched between us, trust remained. When he answered, his voice was steady, as though no years had passed at all. I explained everything, every detail, every attempt, every insult, and finally the letter. He listened without interruption, and when I was finished, he said only one thing. "They've underestimated you. Let's remind them who you are." We moved quickly. Thomas arranged for a trusted doctor, one who valued truth over bribery, to conduct a full evaluation of my health. The results came back clear. My memory was sharp, my judgment sound, my independence intact. But that was not enough. Together, we crafted a strategy. The will I had rewritten weeks ago was locked safely in his office. Ironclad, airtight, leaving everything not to my children, but to a cause and people who had shown me kindness and dignity. My children, by their own actions, had written themselves out of my life. When the court date arrived, I stood in the witness box, my cane steady in hand. Across the room sat my children, faces painted with false concern, whispering lies about how they only wanted to protect me. But when the judge asked me to speak, I told the truth. Every detail, every scheme, every midnight visit, every threat. And then, with calm precision, I handed over the recorder. The red light blinked one last time as the judge listened to their own voices dripping with malice. The courtroom shifted. My children's confidence cracked, their faces pale under the weight of their own words. Even their lawyer struggled to salvage their defense. By the time the gavel fell, the ruling was clear. I was of sound mind, fully capable of managing my affairs. My children's petition was denied. Not only that, the judge issued a stern warning about further harassment. As I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sun broke through the clouds, warm against my skin. I knew the battle wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my dignity, my right to live without fear in the home I had built with my own hands. They had tried to take it all, but instead, they had handed me victory. Yet deep in my heart, I knew one final act remained. It was time to ensure that when I was gone, they would inherit not the walls they coveted, but the lesson they had refused to learn. Weeks passed after the court ruling, and in that time, I watched my children from afar. They did not visit. They did not call. Instead, I heard whispers from neighbors about their bitterness, their outrage, their determination to try again. But the truth was, they no longer had power over me. The law had spoken, the evidence was clear, and my resolve was stronger than ever. Still, I knew they were waiting, for the day I was no longer here. Their greed was patient. They believed that when I finally passed, the house would still fall into their hands, a reward for their cruelty. But they were wrong. Thomas and I finalized every page of the will, making sure there were no cracks for their deceitful fingers to slip through. My estate, my savings, and the home that held decades of memories, all of it would bypass them entirely. Instead, I chose to leave it to those who had shown me kindness in the twilight of my years. The nurse who had cared for me when I fell ill, the neighbor who brought soup on cold nights, the community center that gave me warmth and company. All were named, protected by law and sealed in trust. And for my children? Nothing. It wasn't out of spite. It was justice. They had chosen greed over love, control over compassion. They had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. They had reduced me to a burden, an extra mouth, a name they hoped to erase once my house was theirs. By their actions, they had disinherited themselves. One quiet evening, I invited them all to dinner. They came, lured by curiosity, perhaps even by guilt, though more likely by the hope that I was ready to forgive and make things right. The table was set, the house warm with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. For a moment, it almost felt like old times. Almost. After the plates were cleared, I looked each of them in the eye. Their laughter faded when they saw the seriousness in mine. "I know why you came," I began. "And I want you to hear this from me directly, so there are no surprises later. The house, the savings, everything I own, it will not go to you. You will receive nothing." Their faces fell. Anger sparked in their eyes, mouths opening with protests, excuses, lies. But I raised a hand and continued, my voice steady. "You put me in a home to free up this house. You whispered about me behind closed doors, treated me as though my worth ended with my age. You wanted to erase me while I was still alive. Well, I am still here. And I will not let you win. Silence filled the room. Their fury was palpable, but it could not touch me anymore. The papers were signed, the will secure, the future sealed. They could not undo what had been done. I stood, leaning on my cane, and walked to the window. Outside, the garden glowed under the soft light of the moon. It was peaceful, unbroken by their greed, untouched by their plans. This house, I said, turning back to them, will live on long after me, but not through you. It will belong to people who understand love, respect, and family, the very things you chose to abandon. And with that, I dismissed them. They stormed out, slamming doors and muttering curses, but I felt no fear, no sadness. Instead, I felt free. For the first time in years, the burden of their betrayal lifted from my shoulders. I had taken back my life, my dignity, and my legacy. As I sat by the fire that night, the crackle of the wood filling the silence, I smiled. They had wanted my house before I forgot who they were. But it was them who would be forgotten, left with nothing but the memory of what they lost. Not because I failed them, but because they failed me. And as the flames danced in the hearth, I whispered to myself, a quiet farewell to the pain they caused. Thank you for watching.